At 8:42 on a Friday night inside the Seabrook Grand Ballroom, Celeste Whitaker smiled beneath a chandelier and said, "Beat my champion, Mr. Callahan, and I'll sign your safety contract. Lose, and your crew loses the harbor job by morning, along with the insurance, keeping your daughter in therapy." My 7-year-old Grace heard every rich person laugh while her fingers climbed to the tiny hearing aid behind her right ear. The carbon fiber racing yacht grinder sat between us under the lights, and when I looked down, the force needle trembled backward once. That one wrong twitch was the first sign that the whole room was laughing at the wrong man. Reed Vale, Celeste's champion, stood beside the machine in a white dinner jacket, all polished teeth and shoulders built for cameras, rolling his neck while donors lifted their phones like they were about to record a circus act. I felt Grace's blue ribbon tied around my wrist under my sleeve, the one she had knotted there in the truck because she said, "So you remember where home is?" Celeste did not look cruel exactly. Cruel would have been simpler. She looked pale, composed, guarded, and expensive in the way old money teaches people to stand still while other people bleed quietly. But she still made the joke. And a room full of people still laughed because a man in a faded work shirt had become the entertainment. Before I tell you what happened when I rolled up my sleeve, do me one favor. If you have ever had someone with clean hands laugh at the work that kept your child fed, subscribe to this channel. This story is for the people who get judged by their shirt before anyone bothers to look at their hands. My name is Owen Callahan. I'm 39 years old, a maritime rigger at Seabrook Harbor, and I raised Grace alone in a 2-room apartment above an old cable shop that smells like salt, diesel, wet rope, and coffee burned too long on a hot plate. I do not arm wrestle for pride. I do not fight men at charity galas. My strength comes from 20 years of listening to steel cable complain before it snaps, from knowing how much pressure a line can take, from learning that the most dangerous sound in the world is sometimes almost no sound at all. That was why the needle bothered me. Not the insult, not Reed's smirk, not the woman with the billion-dollar harbor empire treating my contract like a napkin she could throw away. The needle. It kicked backward against load just once, the way a rig does when somebody has hidden resistance where resistance should not be. Then Reed pulled on his gloves, and I saw a gray smear of rosin across the palm, caught with one tiny red fiber from a dock line I recognized. Grace saw me stop breathing. She whispered, "Daddy, is it broken?" I looked at my little girl, then at Celeste Whitaker, then at the machine everyone thought was only a game, and I said the only thing I could say without becoming what they wanted me to be. "No, sweetheart." But somebody wanted to look that way. To understand why I did not step away from that machine when every sensible part of me wanted to take Grace by the hand and leave, you have to understand what my mornings looked like before Celeste Whitaker ever learned my name. Most days started at 4:36, not because I liked the quiet, but because the harbor did not care whether a man had slept. Our apartment sat above Marlowe Cable Repair, 2 rooms over a shop that always smelled of salt water, old grease, wet rope, and the burnt coffee Mr. Marlowe kept forgetting on the warmer. The floorboards clicked under my boots in winter. The radiator knocked like somebody trapped behind the wall. Grace slept on the pull-out sofa because I gave her the bedroom after her mother left, and every morning I moved through that place like the whole world depended on not waking her too early. I would pack her lunch first. Peanut butter on wheat, apple slices if we had them, half a banana if the brown spots had not won yet, and the little note she pretended not to care about but kept folded in her backpack anyway. Then I would count pills for her ear infection, check the battery in her hearing aid, and pour the last of the milk into her cereal before I made coffee for myself with water that tasted faintly like copper. I was 39 years old, and my hands looked older than that. Cable work does that to a man. It puts grooves into your palms that soap never fully reaches. It thickens your knuckles, scars your wrists, teaches your shoulders to ache before rain, and gives you a strange kind of religion about pressure. You learn that steel cable talks. It groans before it fails. It sings when the load is clean. It gives a tiny complaining twitch when someone has forced it wrong and hoped nobody would notice. That is not strength the way men like Reed Vale understood strength. It is not mirror strength. It is listening strength. The morning of the gala, Grace sat at our little table in one sock and her school sweater, drawing a blue line around my wrist with a marker because the ribbon had frayed again. She said, "People listen better when you look like you belong somewhere." I laughed softly, but hurt more than I let show. 7-year-olds should not have to think about where their fathers belong. I told her, "A man belongs wherever he can stand without lying." She looked at me for a long second, serious as a judge, then tied the real blue ribbon over the marker line anyway. That same week, the clinic had called about her therapy coverage. The harbor contractor had delayed 2 checks. My truck needed front brakes. And the safety complaint I had filed about the new Whitaker Marina project was sitting unread on 3 different desks because men in clean offices did not like hearing that a man with rope burns might understand load ratings better than their consultants. At 6:12 that evening, while Grace was brushing crumbs off her sweater for the 3rd time, my phone buzzed with a number I did not know. The woman on the other end said she was calling from Whitaker Harbor Group, and if I still wanted my safety contract considered before the board vote, a mess. Whitaker expected me at the charity gala by 8. The woman on the phone did not ask whether I could make it by 8. She said it the way rich people say weather, as if the rest of the world had already agreed to arrange itself around them. "Mr. Callahan, Ms. Whitaker has reviewed your safety objection and is prepared to hear you tonight at the Seabrook Grand Ballroom. Formal attire is preferred." I looked down at my work shirt, the cuff stiff with dried salt, and at Grace standing in the doorway with toothpaste foam still at the corner of her mouth. The clock on the microwave read 6:14. The gala started in less than 2 hours. "I'm not a donor," I said. "I'm a man whose crew will be under that crane when the first line fails." There was a pause, small and cold. "Then I suggest you not be late." I should have hung up. A reasonable man would have. But reasonable men with full bank accounts and backup childcare get to make cleaner choices than the rest of us. I had a 7-year-old who needed therapy coverage, a crew of dockhands with mortgages and bad knees, and a safety complaint that had been passed around like a dirty coffee cup nobody wanted to touch. So I washed my hands twice, changed into the least faded button-down I owned, and took Grace with me because Mrs. Albright downstairs was at dialysis and there was no one else. Grace did not complain. She only slipped her drawing notebook in her backpack, checked the battery door on her hearing aid, and tightened the blue ribbon around my wrist like she was securing a line before a storm. "Are they going to listen?" she asked. I wanted to lie to her. Fathers get tempted by gentle lies more often than we admit. Instead, I said, "They're going to hear me. Listening is their choice." My truck coughed twice before it started. The right front brake scraped all the way down Harbor Road, past the bait shop, past the dark shapes of cranes standing over the water, past men in reflective jackets, finishing the kind of work that makes wealthy waterfronts look effortless. By the time we reached the Seabrook Grand, the valet lane was full of black SUVs and silver sedans with engines so quiet they sounded electric even when they were not. A security guard looked at my truck like it had drifted in on the tide. Inside, the lobby smelled of white lilies, marble polish, and money old enough not to raise its voice. Grace's fingers found mine. At the check-in table, a woman with a pearl earpiece looked at my shirt, then at Grace's backpack, and her smile thinned. "Staff entrance is around the side." I did not raise my voice. I had learned a long time ago that dignity gets smaller when you shout for it. Owen Callahan, Whitaker Harbor Group, called me. Her eyes flicked to a tablet. Something changed, not respect exactly, but recognition of inconvenience. A second later, Celeste Whitaker appeared at the top of the marble steps in a pale dress sharp enough to look like armor, blonde hair pulled back, face composed, eyes measuring everything before it could measure her. Reed Vale stood beside her, one hand around a champagne glass, the other resting on the carbon fiber yacht grinder displayed under the charity lights like a sacred object. Celeste looked at my work boots, then at the blue ribbon on my wrist, then at Grace. For half a second, something in her expression almost moved. Then Reed leaned close and said loudly enough for the nearest donors to hear, "This is the cable guy?" The first laugh came from a man near the bar. Then another. Then the whole room began turning toward us. The room did not go silent all at once. It changed in layers. First came the little laugh from the man by the bar, the kind men use when they're trying to decide whether cruelty is allowed in a place with cameras. Then a woman near the donor wall covered her mouth with 2 fingers and smiled into her champagne. Then somebody behind me said, "He brought a child?" Like Grace was not a little girl standing 3 inches from my hand, but some mistake I had carried in off the street. I felt her fingers tighten around mine. The blue ribbon on my wrist had slipped below my cuff, bright and cheap against the white shirt I had ironed twice because I only owned one good one. Reed Vale saw it. Of course he did. Men like Reed notice anything they can turn into a weapon. He tilted his glass toward my wrist and said, "That your lucky charm, Callahan? Or what does the harbor will make you wear friendship bracelets now?" A few people laughed harder that time. Grace looked down at the ribbon like she had done something wrong. That was the moment I had to put my anger somewhere my daughter could not see it. I folded it small. I put it behind my teeth. Celeste stood on the marble step above us, one hand resting on the rail, her face composed in that polished way powerful people use when they're deciding whether another person's embarrassment is useful to them. She was beautiful in the distant, guarded way a lighthouse is beautiful from a boat you cannot afford, pale and still and built to warn people away. Her eyes moved from Reed to Grace, then to me. Something almost bothered her. Not enough to stop him. Not yet. The pearl earpiece woman stepped close and lowered her voice like she was being kind. "Mr. Callahan, perhaps your daughter would be more comfortable near the service alcove while the adults discuss business." I looked at the alcove. Black swinging doors. Stacked trays. A young waiter pretending not to listen. That was where people like us were supposed to disappear until someone needed lifting done. Grace heard it too. Her thumb brushed the battery door of her hearing aid, a nervous habit she had picked up after the courthouse, and she whispered, "Daddy, are we in the wrong place?" I bent just enough for her to hear me, without making a show of it. "No, gracias. We don't become wrong because someone points at a different door." That cost me more than raising my voice would have. Reed smiled like I had amused him. "Relax. Nobody's throwing you out. Ms. Whitaker invited you. We're all very curious what kind of man files a last-minute safety objection against a $40 million marina and then shows up in work boots to defend it." He tapped the carbon fiber grinder with one finger. The hollow sound carried too cleanly. Too light. A real load assembly should have answered deeper than that. I did not look at it long because if Reed knew I had noticed, the game would change before I understood the rules. Celeste came down 3 steps, close enough that I could smell something expensive and cold, like rain on stone. "Mr. Callahan," she said, her voice smooth enough for the donors and sharp enough for me. "My board has engineers, insurers, and maritime consultants who disagree with your complaint. Reed here has raced this equipment on 3 oceans. You understand how this looks." I nodded once. "I understand exactly how it looks." She waited for me to defend myself. I did not. Men in rooms like that expect the poor to beg for credibility. Reed gave the crowd a little shrug. "Then let's make it simple. He says he understands load. I say he understands paperwork and panic. Put him on the grinder." Grace stepped closer to my side before I could move, small shoulder touching my thigh. The ballroom lights glared off the black carbon shell, off the silver donor plaques, off Reed's perfect watch. And there, caught near the base of the grinder handle where nobody in tuxedos had bothered to look, was a single red fiber pinched beneath the housing, trembling every time Reed's finger tapped the frame. I kept my eyes on that red fiber only long enough to understand one thing. It did not belong where it was. In my line of work, a loose strand on the floor is nothing. A loose strand pinched under a load housing is a sentence somebody forgot to finish. The ballroom still had that rich, amused buzz moving through it, glasses touching, silk shifting, donors whispering like they were watching a street performer try to sneak into the opera. Reed wanted me angry. I could feel it in the way he leaned back, chin lifted, waiting for me to defend my shirt, my truck, my daughter, my whole small life. But anger makes your hands loud. Cable work teaches you the opposite. Listen first. Touch last. I crouched beside the grinder without asking permission, slow enough that no security guard had a reason to grab me, and let my fingers hover near the carbon shell. I did not touch the red fiber. I only watched it tremble. Reed laughed through his nose. "Careful, Callahan. That equipment costs more than your apartment." Grace flinched, but she did not step back. She stepped closer. Her blue ribbon brushed against my wrist as she leaned down beside me, her little face serious under the chandelier glare. "Daddy," she whispered, "it's moving when nobody's turning it." That was my girl, 7 years old, scared of crowded rooms. One hearing aid whining softly because the ballroom was too loud, and still she saw the truth faster than a table full of consultants. I looked at the grinder handle, then the base, then Reed's gloves. Gray rosin dust sat in the creases of his palm, the kind sailors use when they need grip, not the kind a gala champion would need for a clean demonstration. Near his cuff was another speck of red. Same shade, same fiber twist. Celeste saw my eyes move. She saw me not touch anything. That mattered. I think it was the first thing about me. She could not fit into the picture Reed had painted for her. A man trying to scam a billionaire would have pointed and shouted. A man trying to win attention would have made a scene. I did neither. I stood up slowly and wiped my hands on my pants out of habit, though I had not touched the machine. "This isn't set clean," I said. The donors quieted by a few inches. Not silent, just enough to hear Reed smile. "That's your expert opinion?" "No," I said. "That's my reason to ask for 1 minute before someone gets embarrassed." Reed's face stayed charming, but the charm tightened around the edges. He's stalling. One of Celeste's consultants, a silver-haired man with a lapel pin shaped like an anchor, gave a polite little cough. "Mr. Callahan, this is racing-grade equipment. It was inspected this afternoon." I nodded once, then inspected again. That line did not land like a speech. It landed like a dropped wrench. Small, heavy. Celeste looked from me to Grace, then down at the ribbon on my wrist, and for half a second her face lost its marble finish. "What exactly do you think you saw?" she asked. I wanted to tell her the truth as far as I had it, but truth said too early in a room like that becomes entertainment before it becomes evidence. So I looked past Reed, toward the black security dome in the ceiling above the display, and said, "I need the setup footage from the last 10 minutes. Reed stopped smiling before anyone else noticed. Reed stopped smiling for less than a second. But less than a second is enough when a man has been pretending not to be afraid. Celeste saw it too. I know she did because her eyes left me and went to him, not with trust broken, not yet, but with the first hairline crack in it. The room waited for her to dismiss me. That was what rooms like that are built to expect. A rich woman nods, security moves, the man in work boots disappears, and the music starts again as if dignity never made sound. Instead, Celeste lifted one finger toward the black security dome over the display. "Pull the last 10 minutes, she said. Reed laughed too quickly. "Celeste, don't turn a fundraiser into a dockworkers' conspiracy hour." She did not look at him. That was the first time I saw power in her that was not cold. It was careful. A staffer brought a tablet over, and while the donors leaned in with that hungry silence people get when humiliation might become entertainment, Grace pressed herself against my side and slipped the blue ribbon loose from my wrist. She did not say anything. She just put in my palm. Small fingers. Big trust. I wrapped one end around my knuckle, not to make a show of it, but because I needed something light enough to tell the truth without touching the machine. "What are you doing?" the silver-haired consultant asked. Listening with my eyes, I said, "That's all." The footage came up grainy and bright. Reed standing near the grinder. Reed laughing with donors. Reed turning his back to the camera for a few seconds while a waiter crossed the frame with a tray of champagne. Nothing dramatic. Nothing a courtroom would love. But the little things were all there if you knew how to read them. His right shoulder dipped. His glove hand disappeared under the carbon housing. Then the red fiber on the floor beside the display was gone. Celeste leaned closer to the tablet. Her perfume cut through the lilies and polished marble, cool and sharp. But underneath it I caught the faint metal smell of the grinder's warm bearings. Reed saw me notice that too. "This is embarrassing," he said, louder now. "He's slowing the program because he can't beat me." I looked at Celeste. I don't need to win an argument. I need that equipment to tell the truth before your guests put their hands on it. Grace reached up and touched her hearing aid, then looked at Celeste in a way no adult in that room could have survived if they had a conscience left. Celeste's jaw tightened. "Show me." So I held the ribbon near the seam below the handle without touching the frame. It fluttered once. Not from air, from vibration. a dead little pulse moving through a machine that was supposed to be still. The consultant's mouth opened, then closed. Reed stepped forward. Enough. His voice lost its shine. You're not letting some custody case cable guy accuse me in front of my sponsors. The words hit Grace before they hit me. I felt her go still. Celeste did too. Her face changed only a fraction, but the room felt it. I folded the ribbon back into my palm. Leave my daughter out of your fear, I said. Quiet. Plain. Reed's hand curled around the grinder handle like he owned the whole harbor. Celeste looked from the tablet to the ribbon, then to the machine waiting under the lights. Fine, she said, guarded again but not blind anymore. If Mr. Callahan says he can read load better than my champion, then he can prove it here, now, with everyone watching. Reed finally looked scared. Celeste's words put me in the center of that ballroom the way a spotlight pins a man to the floor. Prove it here, now, with everyone watching. Reed stepped to the grinder first, rolling his shoulders, giving the donors the little performance they had paid for without knowing it. He pulled once on the handle, just enough to make the carbon frame hum, then smiled at me like strength was something you could buy at a private gym and polish with a tuxedo. I looked down at Grace. She still had one end of the blue ribbon curled in her fist, her eyes fixed on the machine instead of the crowd, and I knew right then that whatever happened next could not be about pride. Pride is heavy. Children should not have to carry it. Stand behind me, sweetheart, I said. Not because I'm scared, she whispered. Because you're smart, I told her. That almost made her smile. Almost. Reed took his turn like a man trying to break a camera with his body. Fast, violent pulls, elbows flared, teeth clenched, the grinder whining under him while the force needle jumped hard and ugly across the dial. The crowd loved it at first. Of course they did. Loud things look honest to people who have never had to listen for danger. Then the needle kicked backward. Just once. Reed covered it with another pull, but I saw Celeste see it. Her face did not change much, only the smallest tightening around her mouth. But that was enough. When my turn came, I rolled up my sleeve. The blue marker line Grace had drawn that morning showed beneath the ribbon stain on my wrist, childish and uneven and more important than every donor plaque in that room. A few people laughed softly, still waiting for the poor man to become funny again. I put my hands on the grinder and did not pull. Not right away. I let the frame talk. Warm bearing smell. Wrong vibration. A faint tick beneath the housing, like a loose strand catching where it should have run clean. Reed muttered, "Come on, hero." I looked at him. "This isn't for you." Then I started. Not hard. Clean. Doc work teaches you that force without rhythm is just a tantrum. I set my feet, dropped my shoulders, and moved with the same steady cadence I used when bringing a loaded line off a crane in crosswind. The needle climbed slower than Reed's at first, and someone snickered. Then it held. No yump. No waste. The hum changed from a complaint to a note. I felt the hidden snag catch on the third rotation, and instead of powering through it, I eased half an inch, shifted the load, and pulled again. The red fiber snapped free from beneath the housing and spun onto the marble like a little piece of blood-colored thread. The grinder went smooth. The needle passed Reed's mark. The room stopped breathing. I did not raise my hands. I did not look at the donors. I only let go before the machine could overrun and turn toward Grace. She had both hands over her mouth, not scared now, just stunned in the quiet way children get when the world finally tells the truth out loud. "You fixed its voice," she whispered. That broke something in me more than applause ever could have. Celeste stepped closer to the grinder, staring at the red fiber on the floor, then at the tablet still showing Reed's shoulder dipping out of view. For the first time all night, she looked at me without the old distance in her eyes. Not soft, not safe, but awake. Reed moved fast then, too fast for a man who had nothing to hide. He leaned toward Celeste, his smile gone, and said low enough that only those of us near the machine could hear, "Sign that contract for him, and the board hears what your father buried in the Marina files." Celeste's face went pale under the lights. Then her assistant stepped up with a folder, hands trembling, and I saw the Whitaker Harbor contract inside it, already open to the signature page, waiting for me like a reward and a trap at the same time. The folder looked heavier than paper had any right to look. It sat open in the assistant's trembling hands. The Whitaker Harbor seal stamped in dark blue at the top, Celeste's signature line waiting at the bottom like a door that could open or close my whole life. For 1 second, I saw what taking it would mean. Grace's therapy covered. My crew back under contract. The truck brakes fixed before they failed on Harbor Road. A winter without counting milk by the half-gallon. Reed saw that second pass across my face and stepped into it like a man sliding a knife between ribs. "Sign it," he said quietly. "Take the win. Take the money. Take whatever story you need to tell your kid in the morning. But if she opens those Marina files, her father's name burns with mine, and yours gets dragged through every custody rumor I can feed to a reporter by breakfast." Grace did not understand every word. Children almost never understand the whole weapon. They only hear where it is pointed. Her hand found mine, and I felt the blue ribbon trapped between our palms, damp now from her little fist. Celeste stood so still I thought for a moment she had stopped breathing. The cold, guarded woman who had laughed from the marble steps was gone for just one blink, and beneath her was somebody younger, somebody cornered by a dead man's shadow and a living man's threat. I could have used that. That is the ugly truth. I could have turned toward the room, held up the red fiber, pointed at the tablet, said Reed's name loud enough for every donor phone to catch it, and watched him shrink. I could have demanded the contract, the insurance, the public apology, maybe even enough money to never climb another wet dock ladder again. And part of me wanted to, not the noble part, the tired part, the father part that had stretched peanut butter thin and pretended a scraping break was just a sound. Then Grace whispered, "Daddy is winning when they hurt back." The ballroom did not hear her. I did, and that was enough. I closed the folder with 2 fingers and pushed it gently back toward Celeste's assistant. Reed blinked. Celeste looked at me like she had misread the language I was written in. "I'm not selling the truth back to the people who misplaced it," I said. My voice came out lower than I expected. "And I'm not using your father's shame or your boyfriend's fear to buy my daughter a safer life. That would teach her the wrong thing." Reed laughed once, sharp and ugly. "So what? You're walking away from the contract." I looked down at the ribbon in Grace's hand, that cheap blue strip she had tied around me, so I would remember where home was. "No," I said. "I'm walking away from the trap." Then I turned to Celeste. Not to beg, not to threaten, just to place the choice where it belonged. If the marina is safe, open the files. If it isn't, stop the vote. Sign the audit, because workers deserve to go home alive, not because I beat a man at a party. The room had gone quiet in a different way now. Not shocked. Listening. Celeste's fingers closed around the folder, and for the first time all night, she looked at Grace before she looked at me. Reed moved toward the tablet, fast enough that the nearest security man shifted, and Celeste said one word that cut through the ballroom cleaner than any shout could have. "Don't." Her hand shook when she reached for the microphone. I still did not know whether she was about to save the truth or bury it with better manners. Celeste held the microphone for 3 full seconds before she spoke, and in a room like that, 3 seconds can feel like a trial. Reed stood close enough to her shoulder to remind her what fear was supposed to do. The folder shook in her hand. The tablet still showed his glove vanishing under the grinder housing, and the red fiber lay on the marble between us, small enough to sweep away and heavy enough to change the air. When Celeste finally raised her eyes, she did not look at the donors first. She looked at Grace. "I owe this child an apology," she said, and the room went still in a way applause never could have made it. I invited her father here to be heard, and then I allowed him to be treated like entertainment. Her voice did not break, but it lost that polished blade she had carried all night. That was not strength. That was cowardice dressed up as manners. Reed whispered her name, sharp and warning. Celeste did not turn. She opened the marina file on the tablet, tapped once, and sent it to the Harbor Board Council standing near the back wall. Not to the donors, not to the cameras, to the people who could stop the vote. "The Whitaker Marina expansion is suspended pending an independent safety audit," she said. "Mr. Callahan's complaint will be entered formally. His crew will remain under contract during review, and Mr. Vale will have no further access to project equipment or records." Reed laughed like a man, trying to keep a building standing with one hand. You have no idea what you just did. Celeste looked at him then, and there was hurt in her face, but not weakness. For once I do. Security did not drag him out. There was no grand scene, no movie ending where a bad man falls apart under a chandelier. Two board attorneys stepped beside him. One took the tablet. One asked him to come quietly. And Reed, who had spent the whole night making other people small, suddenly looked very alone among all that money. I should have felt satisfied. I did not. Satisfaction is different from peace. Grace slipped her hand into mine, and I felt the blue ribbon between her fingers, warm from being held too tightly. Celeste came down from the stage without the microphone. Up close, she looked less like a billionaire and more like a person who had finally heard the sound her own world made when it crushed someone. "Mr. Callahan," she said, then stopped and looked at Grace instead. "I'm sorry I laughed when I should have listened." Grace studied her with that careful, wounded seriousness children use when adults have disappointed them before. Then she reached for the ribbon, untied it from my wrist, and walked to the yacht grinder. She tied the little blue strip around the handle where the red fiber had been caught. Not tight, just enough to stay. "What remembers," she said. Nobody laughed. Celeste pressed her lips together and nodded like those 3 words cost more than anything in the ballroom. Later, her assistant tried to hand me a private settlement envelope. I did not open it. I told her the audit, the contract, and the apology were enough. I still drove home in the same truck with the scraping brake. I still went back to the harbor the next Monday. But when Grace fell asleep against my shoulder that night, she whispered, "Daddy, they saw you." And for the first time in a long time, I believed her.